The Land of Oz is where we'll be on the next episode of Painting and Travel. Sarah goes down the yellow brick road to visit the Oz Museum in the small town of Wamego, Kansas, while Roger sets up his easel and paints a 100-year-old feed store.
Well, it's another beautiful day. Today we're in Kansas, a little town called Wamego, Kansas. Last night we spent the night near Topeka, Kansas, and we visited the state capitol there. It's one of the most beautiful buildings. The interior was just incredibly beautiful inside. We spent some time there looking around. We also spent a little bit of time before we got there at St. Louis, Missouri. We went to the Arch, but it was getting late and the weather was getting a little bad, so we moved on. But here in Wamego, we're back in the country again, and just really where Sarah and I like to be, and where we find all these beautiful things of character, like this old feed elevator here. It's where they sell feed. It's over 100 years old, so I'm going to paint that. We're right next to some railroad tracks. We might have a train or two come by. But what attracted us to this town primarily was some billboards on the interstate that said Oz Museum. So we followed the signs in, and here we are. We're going to take a look at that museum in a little while. But right now I'm going to get started on this painting because the light is just so nice here. The weather's great too. I've got my palette here today. I have just primary colors out. I have 3 transparent primary colors and 3 opaque colors. I've got ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, Indian yellow. Here I have cerulean blue, cadmium red, and cadmium yellow light. Of course, I have white. They're slipping down my palette a little bit, but I think I can live with that. I always start out with transparent colors. I don't want white in any of my paints to begin with. I don't want things to get chalky, so I always start out with these transparent colors. These are oil paints I'm using today. I usually use acrylics, but today I decided to use some oils. I don't know exactly how far I'll get with this little painting. And this may be sort of like a little field study. And it really doesn't matter to me whether I get a terribly nicely finished painting out here. Just kind of the idea of sitting out here for people like Sarah and myself that are not from Kansas. When we think of Kansas, we think of a couple of things, and it's very stereotyped, but we think of tornadoes and the Wizard of Oz, which is very unfair to Kansas because as we've traveled through here, it's a really beautiful state, what we've traveled through so far. Just gorgeous rolling hills, lots of farmland, cattle. This has been a feed store for over 100 years, and it still is. This structure on top here is called a head house. What they do is they take the grain, whether it's oats, corn, barley, whatever it is, in an elevator, they take it up and they store it in different sections in this head house. When somebody wants some feed or some corn or whatever they want, these little pipes on the side, they'll pull it out and it will fill up bins down here. I've always wondered what that's called. It's called a head house. Now I'm just sketching this in with some transparent colors here, and I'm trying to work out my composition. If I don't get my composition good, then the whole painting will fail, guaranteed. So I have to sort of maybe be quiet to myself here for a few minutes. So this might be a good time to join Sarah as she visits the Oz Museum just down the street.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
This is Mercedes Michalowski, and she's the coordinator and the manager and the curator for the Museum of Oz here. I see you have many items here, lots of it very nostalgic to me, having grown up with Oz and loved the movie. What are some of your favorite items here?
Well, I think one of my favorite items is we've got a first edition novel right here with a Baum signature. That's quite unique. And we also, one of our big feature items is we have one of the original flying monkeys from the movie that they used in the flying scenes. And those were actually miniature rubber monkeys. And there were only, I think, 30 made and only 3 left in existence, and we have one of them.
Of course, he's tiny there. The model's only, what, 6 inches?
Roughly, with the wingspan.
And I was reading a little about Frank Baum and realized that he didn't start out as a writer. He was raised chickens, he was an axle mechanic, an actor, a number of things. And then through telling these stories to his children, grandchildren, he was encouraged to write down the story, and that's how he came up with the wonderful story of Oz.
Yes, he actually had quite a few business failures in his life, from newspaper publishing to owning a baseball team to the ones you mentioned. And it wasn't until he moved to Chicago, right in the height of preparations for the World's Fair, that he really started to develop the story of Oz and decided to put pen to paper and write the novel.
And I always wondered where Oz came from, and I read that on the filing, he looked at his filing cabinet, and it was A to L and O to Z. Is that right?
It is one of the famous myths that we cannot confirm nor deny. In speaking with Baum's great-grandsons, they say that it's a wonderful part of the story of L. Frank Baum, and they would never dream of discouraging it. So we don't know that it's 100% true, but it's very probable, and we love that story.
It's a good story. I know the Scarecrow was played by Ray Bolger, and I remember that Judy Garland, who played Dorothy, was only 16 at the time. And tell me about this book.
Well, that is an edition of the first book in the series, and we actually recently noticed that the inside cover is signed by Judy Garland. The movie came out in 1939, and one of the interesting things you'll note in these cases, there's a lot of merchandise. The copyright for the novel expired in 1956, which made it accessible for anybody to use text and images. So you see a real big surge of merchandising right around the mid to late 50s because of that fact.
It seems like there's everything from Oz dolls to tea sets to puzzles, all sorts of cute little doodads.
Pretty much anything they could get the name on, they did. For instance, here we've got peanut butter jars. This is Swift's peanut butter, and they used images of the Oz, and soaps, toys, chess sets.
I saw some marionettes over there. I used to like those when I was a kid. Let's see what else around this corner. Oh, here's the Cowardly Lion, played by Bert Lahr, always one of the most lovable characters. And I see we're entering the haunted forest. Go first. Lions and tigers and bears, oh my. When I was looking in one of the displays, I noticed that it says that there are a number of different costume changes and also lots of the same costume. And what about this particular pair of ruby slippers?
Well, they're different simply because they've got felt on the bottoms of them, and that was to reduce the noise made by Judy Garland's feet as they were walking on the yellow brick road.
And here's Glinda, the Good Witch, and I remember she helps Dorothy out in the story. And one thing that she says, I believe, is a heart is not judged by how much you love, but how much you are loved by others. And then how is it Glinda helps Dorothy get home?
Well, Glinda tells Dorothy to click her heels 3 times and say there's no place like home.
There's no place like home. Mercedes, thank you so much for giving us a tour.
Welcome.
It gave me goosebumps to go through and see all the lovely memorabilia, and I hope you have lots and lots of guests over the years.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.
Now let's check back with Roger and see how he's doing with his painting.
I think I have this whole thing a little bit too large. And I guess that's part of this whole process. But at this point, you know, it's very easy to just start over. And I'm never afraid to start over. That's why I don't want to get in too much detail and that sort of thing early on, because this way I don't have much of an investment. So this is the time to make all these compositional changes right at the start. So I've made this a little bit smaller, and this gives me the chance to get this railroad track sweeping around here. I say to myself when I do these paintings, what is it that attracts me to the subject to begin with? And I try and sort of hold that in my mind as I paint. And I try and keep that concept throughout. It could be a patch of light that's coming across the building. What I like is just the severity of the shapes of the building. They're just sort of hard. They're, you know, it just has a real stability about them that I find attractive. And we've got a lot of other little things going on here too that it's kind of fun. We've got this little dirt road over here which can act as a nice little patch of light coming across here. Earlier on, this was in shadow. Now the sun's coming around. Now we've got a nice shadow coming across here. One problem with this composition is this is right in the middle. And generally, I would say that doesn't make a good painting, to have my main subject right in the middle. I'm going to let that go on this piece because I think I have enough else going on around here where I don't want to cut my board into thirds and put this building up into one of the thirds. This is the feature of this painting, so I'm going to keep it right in the middle. It may not work. Sometimes they don't, but we'll just see how it goes here. So far, so good. It looks okay to me. Well, you know, these Kansas skies, you know, Kansas, I always think of Kansas being a big place. For some reason, these skies just feel that way, too. Hope I can express that in this painting. Just want to lay in a few values first, just to kind of establish where I think I might be going with this. I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. I need to stick with my dark colors first, so I'm going to backtrack just a little bit, mixing up all three of my primary colors here, the transparent colors, and we'll put in some of these little features like the windows, because I can't paint dark colors over light colors very well. It just doesn't work. See, they mix in with, if I have a light color underneath there, it mixes in. So I'll put my dark colors in first. We've got other things over there. We've got a sign. We've got all sorts of stuff going on there. But one thing about these paintings is I try and look at it and I try and simplify it as best I can. I take some of that same color, put a little bit of white in it. And I use that for my shadow. Well, the other thing I should mention is this is a masonite board I'm working on as opposed to canvas. It's just a 1/8" masonite covered with gesso, and I primed this with a burnt sienna, but I used acrylic burnt sienna, so this just dried almost immediately, but I did that some days ago. And I carry a whole lot of these with me, so they're all ready to use. But I like to have this warm undertone on my painting to start with. I like to try and establish my values around on the entire piece. I don't want to finish any one part of this painting right away. I love it when this sheet metal or this galvanized tin roofs, I love it when it gets a little rusty. We have a little bit of that up here. It's always so much fun to put in that rusty color. Just adds so much character to the painting, you know. I'm still sticking with pretty much my transparent colors at the moment. I'm putting some white in them to make these darker, but I'm keeping those all transparent for now. I'm excited about, whenever I get out here and I start to paint, I get excited about this sort of thing. So I know I always seem like I'm really trying to rush and get things done, and it's not because I'm really trying to hurry. It's just that I get so excited about getting out here and painting. working with oils is so much different than working with acrylics. And I work with acrylics much more than I do with oils. So in some ways, working with oils is kind of a new experience for me. Not new experience. I've been working with oils for decades, I hate to admit. But primarily, I've been working with the acrylics. So these do handle a lot differently than acrylics. I have to think about things quite differently. They say the best thing about acrylics is that they dry fast. And the worst thing about acrylics is that they dry fast. I'm making this sweep a little bit more pronounced than I can see sitting at this angle. When I'm standing up, I can see the sweep of this track a little bit better. What I'm shooting for here is to get these, as I said before, these big basic shapes in, and I want to get the whole canvas covered. Until I get the whole canvas covered, or the whole board covered, I can't really gauge what my values, which values are right and which values are wrong. So I'm still fighting here, and I want to get everything covered. I need to get this sky covered and this thing, all this ground covered down here. So that's what I'll try and do here. It helps to have this burnt sienna down here on the bottom, because some of this color, this burnt sienna, can show through and give me a nice warmth on this earth tone down here. So I've already got two colors going for me down here. I got the color that's on the board, and then when I put some paint on here, I've got that second color. So I can have some texture going on in there simply because I've had this burnt sienna ground on here and it's dry already. So that helps me quite a bit. You know, I've always loved color a whole lot. I mean, I'm fascinated with color. Everywhere I go, I study and look at colors, and I look at a color and I say to myself, what color, how do I make that color? What color is that? How does it compare to another color? But what I'm thinking more and more these days is so much out there of what I'm looking at is gray. I'm not working with bright primary colors. I'm using primary colors here, of course, but I'm mixing them, so there's not a lot of pure color out there in the world. And I'm sure, you know, you may disagree with me at some point, but, you know, even the sky, it's probably one of the most pure things here. We got really a pure green grass down here, but if I were to use the blue of out of my tube, or the green, if I were to put some green out here from like a sap green or permanent green light, it would look false because it would be just too bright. Things out here are very subtle. They're very gray, actually. For me, using just the three primary colors, and often I put other colors out of my palette too, but if I use the three primary colors here, just red, yellow, and blue, to mix all my paints with, I'll maintain a harmony in my painting that I would probably lose if I were to put out a lot of other colors, like permanent green light, for instance. And if I did put out permanent green light, I would, in order to have some continuity, I would have to mix one of these other colors with the permanent green light in order for my harmony to stay intact. You see, there's a lot of texture in these rocks down here. And with oil paints, it's much more difficult to get that texture. If I were using acrylics, the first coat I would put on here would be dry already, and I could put on some other paints over it and create a texture quite easily. But with oils, it's a whole different procedure. So I'll have to deal with that in a little while. It is fun to work with oils, though, because you can just push them around so easily. I believe that's a little bit too high. I may bring that down a little bit. Another nice thing about oils is, of course, with acrylics, it'll be dry. I could just paint over this. With oils, you just have to wipe it out. That's pretty easy to do, too. Got some nice trees back there, so I'll mix up ultramarine blue, Indian yellow, get those trees. Now I have to be careful not to, it's so easy to follow the same shapes. In other words, if I have a roof line this way, it's easy to follow the tree line on the same angle. So, and even if it is, I need to change that. So maybe bring that tree line up here and then down down here, you see. If I'm painting the sky, which I'll do next, would be to, if I were to put some big cumulus clouds up here, it would be very easy to paint the cumulus clouds sort of around the same shape as this building. I don't know why that is. I'm conscious of it, yet I still do it all the time, and I see paintings all the time where if you've got a tree here going on a big curve, someone will paint a cloud going over on the same shape. It's just sort of a natural thing to do. Don't know why, but I have to be conscious of it. Even though I've done so many paintings, it still happens to me. Now, things in the foreground, if I want things to stand out in the foreground, there's a few rules that I follow. One is if I paint something in the foreground, the brush strokes must be a little more aggressive. And with oils, they tend not to flatten out like they do with acrylics. So my brush work in the foreground can be, very sort of rough or just sort of layered on. In the background with the clouds, I don't want all that texture. I don't want to pile up a lot of paint because I want things in the background to be soft. Also in the foreground, I'm going to have more contrast. So I'm going to have more lights and darks, a lot more contrast in the foreground, and I'm going to have brighter colors in the foreground. In the background, the colors are going to be a little more subtle. They're going to be a little bluer because of the atmosphere, and they're going to be grayer. So that's how I'll try and get some of the feeling of depth in the painting. It's important to know that these are all just my own personal ways of working, and everybody works differently. So everything I'm saying here may not apply to how you like to paint, and that's perfectly okay. I think programs like these and others can be very beneficial, and in some ways they could be very harmful because in some ways I set up rules. This should be this way, this should be that way. But it's never a good idea, so don't listen to all these rules. These rules only work for me, and half the time they don't work for me either. I just like being out here in the sun in Kansas, because I've never been in Kansas before. I love those beautiful white cumulus clouds back there. So I'm going to just put in kind of a flat sky here, and then I'm going to go back in a little while and maybe just put some of those cumulus clouds there, which will be sort of warm in color, at least the top parts of them. Now I'm starting to get my values established, and once I get this done, I can see where I need to go, whether I need to get things lighter or darker and more contrasty, that sort of thing. I like these pipes off the side here. And I try and be as painterly as I can with acrylics. But painting with oils is like painting with butter. It's like making a cake with frosting. I don't know, it just it has a nice richness about it that acrylics don't have. It's strange I should even say that because I use acrylics 90% of the time. It's always going to be a little lighter down here and a little warmer down here than it will up at the horizon. So as I look up, the sky gets really blue. As I come down, it looks warmer. This is a good time. I always bring my camera with me. It's a good time to take a digital photograph of what I'm painting. It's easy to forget to take a photograph sometimes when I'm working out in the field like this, but I'm always grateful when I'm at home that I have that photograph. What I'm also trying to do here a little bit is work from thin paint to thicker paint. If I have it too thick to begin with, then it's hard to put other paints over the top of this. So my first coats are fairly thin on here, and then I can just butter it up a little bit thicker as I go. I can't have the paints too thin though, the oil paint's too thin on the first go around because it's hard to put thick colors over paint that's kind of wet. I don't know what this big shape in here is. I think it's a sign if seen from the other side. doesn't really matter. It's just a shape. Not everything in a painting has to be described. A lot of it can be left really nondescript. This thing about leaving it to the imagination, that's not really it. That's what happens, but it's not why I leave out certain things so you can use your own imagination to paint it. It's just because it makes a stronger painting. If everything is detailed, then the focus doesn't go anywhere. The focus is on every little detail. If I put the most detail in this area, then that's where the focus will be. And this can be in soft focus, so this can be sort of just rough brushwork. Well, it's been really great being out here in Kansas. It's a really beautiful, beautiful state, and I love painting this historic feed store, which is over 100 years old. I got what I came for. I have the basic shapes, the colors, the composition, and since I took a digital photograph, I'll have some good reference when I get back to the studio to finish it up. And at that time, we'll put a little more detail on it, let it dry, put a frame on it, and we'll see what it looks like.
For more information about painting and travel with Roger and Sarah Bansemer, visit paintingandtravel.com.